Nuremberg trials, the doctors and nurses stood trial, and they hung. If you are a doctor or a nurse...
My name is Sebastian Shamarani, and my mum is one of the UK's biggest COVID-19 conspiracy theorists.
There's a thing that very, very clever people sometimes do, which is that they make themselves seem more foolish than they actually are. And I think Boris played that game earlier on in his career in order to make himself perhaps seem less threatening to people thicker than him. And as a result, he's reaping the consequences.
Possibly. It's straight out of The Art of War.
Everything that can be infiltrated should be infiltrated.
Sebastian Shamarani was another example. He got in touch with me.
6 months later, she comes out and gaslights this man to his face.
A network of people, the Modi's guys in India, Duterte, and we get Orban, and even think, and we're... How can you know that I'm self-censored?
I'm sure you believe everything I'm saying. But what I'm saying is if you believe something different, I wouldn't be saying it.
Epstein has plenty of money and craves power and access. Look who appears in Epstein's little black book. Nicholas Berggruen. No billionaires, they said, until they fund you and you inherit their ashes. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumour is printed, no secret is revealed. So, JFK got killed for saying things like this. And I've got news for journalists. They can't kill you all at the same time. We've taken a brief look in front of the curtain. Now let's see if we can move behind the curtain and try to move up the hierarchy of this cognitive elite. This mythical cognitive elite here. The links between the anti-vaccine movement and our government are vast and underreported. This is Jacob Rees Mogg here, son to the author of the cognitive elite idea. A month after the vigil, talking to a guy called Base Welshman or Hugh Thorne, basically endorsing the protests. I mean, you can check that out on my Twitter. And it's no surprise that Boris Johnson, his views on climate change come a lot from his good friend, Piers Corbyn. You can see all over the media that he's described as his good friend. I think he used the term friend in one of his articles on The Telegraph, which is behind a paywall, so we can't actually get that. But then there's more link. There's David Curtin, who was recently seen with Mark Francois. There they are there, Tweedledum and Tweedledee. It looks like one's really close and one's really far away, but that's not perspective, that's the size difference. That was a week before, let's just turn this sound off. That was a week before, look at the date, July the 14th there. July 24th, 10 days before, Kate Shemarani threatened our doctors with the noose. And this is him here. The crowd loved that comment. So the links to government are vast, but there are some links that are very curious indeed. Very, very curious. So do you remember Nick Watt? Nick Watt was the BBC journalist who was chased through Whitehall and into Downing Street in an almost lynching of the press. It got mainstream news, obviously, because it was one of their own. But check who comes out. There's a guy who comes out of Downing Street at this time. Here he is. Who's this guy? This guy is a guy called Nick Sundin. Tory candidate suspended over tweets calling Prophet Muhammad a paedophile. Yeah. Let's see what he did when he came out of Downing Street. The usual suspects. So there's William Coleshill there. He owns the Resistance GB channel. And they're having... He's asking, did you get some good shots? This is William Coleshill. He was just chasing Nick Watt into Downing Street. Now he's having a conversation with a guy who was in Downing Street coming out, who's very much involved with these guys. He was always with Subject Access Sam English, like he's in bed with them. And oh look, William Coleshill has also been suspended as a Tory councillor for racist remarks. It's like they're in some sort of club. If we carry on listening.
I'm sorry, James.
Environments might turn into a pea. It's going to be crazy to let a pea in.
Hey guys, this guy is okay.
Who's he work for?
Strain of an old patient coronavirus.
But he came out of Downing Street. What? But he still goes in Downing Street.
So did you see his face drop then when he realised he's on camera and he fucking ran? like he didn't want to be on camera. That's not his mission objective. His mission objective is staying off the camera. But so since I've released this, like who's the fuck is this guy? We don't see him as around as often, which makes me believe what I'm doing is effective. So this is what I think. But basically, we know that Dominic Cummings hires the NRX types of people. He calling for wildcards and whatever, and he did this through an unofficial Gmail account. Applicants to work for Boris Johnson, in the actual job description, it was, if you want to work for Boris Johnson, send in one-page email of ideas to an unofficial Gmail account, ideas for number 10@gmail.com. Like, we know Sabisky has been hired by these people, and this is the only example of the NRX being mentioned in the mainstream media in regards to our government, yet most people would be disturbed by its core NRX ideas. But what are those ideas that are seeping through our government? Like, no one tells us. So, the plot could be, use Boris Johnson as a puppet, like Seb and Sebastian Shemirani and James Dellimpole hinted at in part 1.
What you said about Boris, though, I think there's a thing that very, very clever people sometimes do, which is that they make themselves seem more foolish than they actually are. And I think Boris played that game earlier on in his career in order to make himself perhaps seem less threatening to people thicker than him. And as a result, he's reaping the consequences.
Possibly. It's straight out of the art of war, making... If you know something that your enemy doesn't know, you should let them think the opposite of that. Obviously, because it keeps people in the dark.
Yeah.
So while he is using Boris Johnson as the fall guy and that puppet, he resigns and smirks his way through his verbal diarrhea interview with his controlled op Laura Kuenssberg, in which he tells us all how he scammed the nation.
Right, so it's like, which is the least bad option?
According to him.
The least bad option seemed to be exploit the current situation to try and push certain things through and get the country into a better position.
Who's us? Who's we?
Well, me and a network of people that some of us who did the Vote Leave campaign, some of us who did other things.
How many?
So a big network of people who are trying to change the agenda through the Vote Leave campaign, shadowy figures trying to manipulate people from the background, using Boris Johnson as a puppet, just like Sebastian Shemirani suggested, using his controlled opposition journalist to do the interview. I mean, let's just listen to this bit. She asked a question, this shadowy figure, like, who is this? And he's thinking
of you make it sound this kind of secretive clique. Who?
No, I mean, it's
half a dozen, a dozen.
There's the get out clause. When he's thinking, it's like, okay, that means he doesn't want to answer. I need to ask another question to allow him to answer that one and misdirect from the boo-boo I just made by asking him a tough question. So she lets him off with that. We know that he put these people, these Warner Brothers, he put these on the Sage Council. They had no expertise in pandemics. They're just data people, and he put those people on the panel that was dealing with a pandemic. These are favors for friends, and in his own words, Dominic Cummings exploiting the situation for his own ends. So, with the money that they rinsed from the Treasury, what would you do with that? These are the types of people that burn £50 notes in front of people, homeless people. It makes sense that they would give their out-of-work friends some money to maybe cause some chaos on the streets to distract everyone from. So this was Haiku Ku jumping down at the silent vigil, stood next to Patsy and gave her a little whisper in the ear as he jumped down. And this is them continuing to platform her as if she's this authority on what happened at the vigil because she got arrested there. I mean, if we take a look, a deeper look at the protest itself, this video was filmed by Subject Access. Basically, Sisters Uncut are now in the crowd, and it seems that they've all been removed from the bandstand, and they're continuing their protest from down there. If we skip forward a little bit, you'll see the camera pan back. Patsy says to the camera, listen out for this, "I'm not coming down, fuck it." So that's William Coleshill coming down. Subject Access goes right into her face because she obviously wants to tell them something. If we don't move, we will be arrested. So, I mean, and then she goes out on TV being like, I was manhandled. It's like, nah, mate, you caused a riot and you refused to disengage from it. Like, fuck. Like, of course you're going to get arrested and then de-arrested for breach of the peace. That's happened to me multiple times just for fucking talking to people. Like I say, it makes sense, or it starts to make more sense when we learn that Subject Access is fluent in Russian. Let's have a look at this.
We need a.
No, I have a small speaker.
Is that Russian or
just put it on your phone, and then I'll put it close. in an Arabic accent?
No, it's Russian in a Russian accent.
Oh, there you go. You've
So
added
he
more
does it.
Ys in.
He's not just doing an impression there. He's speaking the language. Subject Access said that if it wasn't for COVID and the pandemic, he wouldn't even be in this country. He would be out of the country somewhere. And so it's no surprise that Dominic Cummings' first job was in Russia. Dominic Cummings has these unauthorized chats with Laura Kuenssberg. They're obviously in bed together. So what are these people doing with the money? We also know that Ralph Masalamani is let's see what he has to say.
Actually, let's start by talking about you and your background. I know that you spent time in California. I know that you've worked with the kind of people who know Dominic Cummings.
So Ralph talks about Dominic Cummings and the people that he works with a lot, and he's worked in California, or he's studied in California. Stanford University he's studied at. Who else has studied at Stanford University? Peter Thiel. There's that window of opportunity, basically, of them meeting each other. Ralph was also in Dulwich College, 2 years below Nigel Farage. And Nigel Farage is good friends with Steve Bannon. Let's see what they have to say to each other in this conversation here.
If you're interested, what I'd like to do is set up something, and I'll fund it somehow, that I think you're the perfect guy. We help knit together this populist nationalist movement throughout the world. Because guys in Egypt are coming to me, the Modi's guys in India, Duterte, and we get Orban and even and we're somehow some sort of convening authority for conferences and stuff like that, so we can get ideas out there. I mean,
so they don't just want to set up this network of nationalist movements. They want to be a convening authority for, what was it?
And stuff like that, so we can get
for conferences. They want to take over the way people meet each other, the way people network. They want to know who's speaking to who at all times. This is just the most dystopian thing. What it sounds like to me is a Joseph Goebbels style coup of the media and society as a whole. So let's look into the ideology of Peter Thiel, the anti-democratic worldview of Steve Bannon and Peter Thiel. They go hand in hand. They both were instrumental in getting Donald Trump elected to the presidency. And Palantir are continuing to still get government contracts in America. These contracts are unlawful. Yet, are we going to see this money come back to us? I don't know. Again, links between Dominic Cummings and Peter Thiel are vast. So Peter Thiel's ideology, he wrote a book called 0 to 1, which is all about monopolies, basically, how you go from nothing to owning everything. And lesson number 6 that we learn is progress comes from monopoly, not competition. So imagine if you took that idea out of the world of capitalism and ran with it into the world of politics. What is a democratic party without an opposition? A democratic party without opposition is not a democracy anymore. It is authoritarian state where thumb. And it makes sense that Peter Thiel goes on further to say, I no longer believe that freedom and democracy are compatible. Well, they are. What he means is freedom to be a billionaire and democracy are not compatible, because once you become a billionaire, you aren't accountable to the democracy anymore. So that's what that means. And so to solve the problem, what Peter Thiel has decided to do is destroy democracy and take that selfish view that his freedom is more important than anyone else's freedom. His freedom to exploit others is much more important than others' freedom not to be exploited. So, in my opinion, he's probably right, but in the wrong way. Billionaires and democracy are not compatible. So let's get rid of billionaires and let's give everybody as much freedom as possible, instead of having that freedom to the billionaires and then we all have to act under their will. Otherwise, they follow you around your area for 3 months and fucking try and silence you into silence. So it's no surprise that Bloomberg reported that the ambitions of these men in Silicon Valley, the billionaires and the owners of basically the PayPal mafia is what it's describing here. The ambitions of these men have often gone hand in hand with Thiel's extremist libertarian political project, a reorganization of civilization that would shift power from traditional institutions such as mainstream media, democratically elected legislators. So, in other words, the cathedral, and he wants to take over this. So let's look at who founded Byline Times. Peter Jukes and Stephen Colgrave, that's obvious, we know that. But founded, let's look further. Byline Times is a development of Byline, a crowdfunding and media outlet platform founded in April 2015 by Seung-Yoon Lee and Daniel Tudor. So who are these guys? So Seung-Yoon Lee is the CEO and co-founder of Radish and previously ran Byline. Radish is a freemium YouTube for stories where you can write, share and monetize from serialized fiction based on bite-sized pieces suitable for 10 minutes on a smartphone. He's also in the Forbes 30 for 30, which is interesting because that's what Mariana Spring is also in. Are they getting their ego stroked by the same people? I wonder. He goes on to say he wants to ultimately democratize the entire publishing industry. How would you go about democratizing the publishing industry, I wonder? Let's see. So Radish, Kakao Entertainment. Let's see. They're not world top writers, but those who express themselves in a clear and attractive to a reader manner. As a result, revenue is split 50-50 between the app and its writers. So in the process of democratizing the publishing industry, this guy is planning on owning it and taking a 50% cut. He owned Byline Times. How much of a cut was he taking from the journalists? That doesn't sound like a democracy to me. That sounds like the democracy that we have that is currently controlled by billionaires. So let's see. Kakao Entertainment. Radish was acquired by Kakao. So he founded Radish, and the Kakao have now bought out Radish for 440 million. That sounds democratic. Selling the democracy to the highest bidder. That sounds very democratic. Looking into Kakao's subsidiaries, it looks like there's been some controversy in which 2 years ago, former Vice President Lee, I think it's a different person, was charged with stealing 18.2 billion won in royalties. That's probably a different currency. Yes, approximately 16 million. So that just sounds like the same as Amazon stealing the tips of drivers. In this process of democratizing the workplace, while it's still being controlled by billionaires, it's not a democracy at all. It's a democracy built in the eyes of the democracy that we have now that is owned by billionaires. These people have this warped idea of democracy because they've come from such privilege that it's just difficult to acknowledge the fact that they're trying to be sincere. How can you be sincere when you're exploiting people's work in order for you to become a millionaire? And it's interesting, these rich people, they don't want to pay 20% tax or 40% or more, whatever, in a country, because that's not freedom. But they do feel they have a right to take 50% of someone's cut for their writing efforts. And he just has to sit on his ass now because he's done his job of creating the platform, which he's just sold for £500 million. Yeah, okay. Remember, Byline Times was inherited from this guy, Seung-Yoon Lee. Did I get his name right there? Seung-Yoon Lee, yeah. Byline Times inherited from Byline.com this guy. So, what do we know? He's also the Oxford Union president. just like Boris Johnson was. Here he is
From our traditional Oxford Union debating style.
introducing the
At the start,
debate.
each speaker will first
And let's
deliver
see how they
Founder
introduce
in 1998 of PayPal
Peter Thiel.
and its CEO at a most extraordinary time. And that coterie of people that he brought around him remain people that he supports and sponsors to the day. After selling PayPal, he founded a global macro fund, Clarion. He then founded Palantir Technologies and keeps on being an angel investor for many. He was the first outside investor in Facebook and still has a sizable part of that and is on the board. He co-founds and managed the Founders Fund. And throughout Silicon Valley, when you speak to people about who is driving things, his name always comes up. We have Elon Musk next Wednesday speaking.
So Peter Thiel is driving things in Silicon Valley, and that was back in May 2013. So for the past decade, he's just been driving everyone forward. His introduction gives us a real insight into that, being such a long time ago, and it makes sense that that influence may have rubbed off on Lee as he's gone on to create his life in kind of his image. He wants to create these monopolies on certain sectors of society, like the reading business. He's managed to sell that for half £1 billion. Has that idea funneled down to Peter Jukes and Byline Times, where they want to take over from the traditional media and replace it with something that seems democratic on the outside, but really it's this extra layer of gatekeep. So 2013, Peter Thiel is invited to Oxford Union, and he has ambitions to take over the media, as we've read here, ambitions to take over the mainstream media. Lee has ambitions to network and soak up as much knowledge as he can from the talks he curates at the Union, and he likens to TED Talks, where anyone who's anyone can pay thousands of pounds to go and basically network at a TED Talk. I believe it is at this point that Peter Thiel probably offered Lee £100,000 to quit university and join his fellowship, which is standard for Peter Thiel. It doesn't make any sense for him not to have made that offer. I reckon Lee possibly turned it down. There's no mention of a graduation here, so maybe he quit. I don't know. Journalists should be asking that question. And at the same time, Peter Jukes is live tweeting from the phone hacking scandal. So he's been a nuisance to traditional media and making sure that the phone hacking scandal is being live reported on from the trial, and that everyone can hear what's going on. Peter Jukes actually crowdfunded the ability to do that for the whole trial, and he asked for two grand a month, and it was fully funded. He went off and did it, and it obviously makes sense that in the same way that Peter Thiel backed Donald Trump to take on the traditional establishment, Peter Thiel would then go and find people in the media that were challenging the mainstream media, the traditional mainstream media, and he'd go and back them. And how would he do that if he doesn't really want to do it himself, because he's a very busy man, and Peter Jukes might have told Peter Thiel to fuck off? How he would do it, he would possibly send one of his flying monkeys. That could have been Sung-Yoon Lee, who in 2015 he sets up Byline to seduce Peter Jukes. It's like, hey, Peter Jukes, come and work for Byline. We'll look after you. It's okay. They do a little conference together where people are asking them questions on crowdfunding. Peter Jukes quite upfront about how he raised the funds for the phone hacking scandal and everything to do with that. But we're led to believe that Byline Times has no billionaire influence in its reporting. However, Nicholas Berggren and Jae-Wong Lee raised $850K to give to Byline before it became Byline Times. And it seems like Berggren has been with Sung-Yoon Lee for quite a while, and I would go as far as saying that Berggren is his mentor, and I would go as far as saying that other guy is also his mentor. Jae-won Lee. I'm not sure if they're related. Lee is a common name in Korea. We're told by Byline too often proprietors and advertisers divert journalists from doing their real job, reporting the truth. It's interesting that I've tried to get Peter Jukes to speak about the NRX. They've ignored me for a long time, and they ignored it to the point where eventually when they do speak to me in private, Jukes admits that he doesn't know anything about the NRX. So I'm suggesting that if it wasn't for the billionaires funding Byline at the start, there wouldn't have been anything for Peter Jukes to inherit. So to say that there has been no billionaire influence in Byline Times' success is a bit of a stretch, in my opinion. And it makes me believe that it's this fight between traditional media and this new media that is backed by Silicon Valley. And it makes sense. It makes this make sense.
That I'm sure you're speaking for the majority of journalists who are trained, have it driven into their heads that this is a crusading profession, adversarial, we stand up against power, a very self-serving view. On the other hand, in my opinion, I hate to make a value judgment, but the better journalists, and in fact the ones who are often regarded as the best journalists, have quite a different picture, and I think a very realistic one.
How can you know that I'm self-censoring? How can you know that
you're
journalists
self-censoring? I'm sure you believe everything you're saying. But what I'm saying is if you believe something different, you wouldn't be sitting where you're sitting.
So once Peter Jukes has inherited Byline Times, they make sure that he stays on message by giving him a handler in the same way that Piers Corbyn has a handler, in that bald-headed tattooed guy, in the same way that they tried to give me a handler who I've now blocked. These handlers will pass you information to distract you from what you want to do. They'll try and keep it on characters fighting against each other, and report on Fiona Hine or report on this person, instead of pointing up to the top of the hierarchy. So Carolyn Robertson is I believe, the handler who makes sure that he's allowed to cause chaos in the organization. And that chaos includes platforming people like this, when other writers at the paper surely must have known the truth, since they reported on the fact that Haiku Ku was there and Piers Corbyn. And also platforming Sebastian Shemirani. I mean, that decision has to come from somewhere, and it's the only thing about him, Sebastian Shemirani, at that time, if you just Googled his name, was his links to like far-right propaganda channels like James Delingpole. So if they're not in on this scam, they're not making it very obvious when they're at the very least being manipulated by these people over and over again. So in a scenario that is kind of similar to mine, I started making a name for myself in the kind of anti-fascist movement, but like in a way that I just want to talk to people, and then it turned into I was then reporting on protests. I've kind of had a similar life to Peter Jukes, so I know the kind of things that they will do to attempt to manipulate you. And it is this NRX network that's doing it. So for Peter Jukes to tell me that he's not aware of the NRX, he's never heard of it, is either very naive, or it's gatekeeping the fact that he's been convinced by the NRX, and now he has become one of these lords with his landowners that do his bidding, including Carolyn Robertson. And this ideology will have come from the people stroking his ego after he's been so successful reporting on the hacking trial. It's just undoubtable to me. So let's look a little bit more closely at the people, the early funders of Byline that turned into Byline Times. Byline Times wouldn't have existed if it wasn't for the inheritance of this billionaire investment that that was given. So Nicholas Berggren, why does he care so much about the Golden State? Until now, most of his notable contribution to the region has been to throw a star-studded party each year for the Oscars. So another man who's very well established, shall we say. Another billionaire. And look at him here, pictured with Wendy Deng Murdoch. Very well established. And if Peter Jukes was careful with his research, he'd realise that making statements like this, there's always three fingers pointing back. Steve Bannon had mourning with disgraced Jeffrey Epstein. Bannon needs the money to bankroll his political agenda. Epstein has plenty of money and craves power and access. Look who appears in Epstein's little black book. Nicholas Berggren. No billionaires, they said, until they fund you and you inherit their ashes. Peter Jukes had his model right for the hacking trial. He asked you for help to fund his reporting, and you gave it to him. His mistake was letting a new set of cognitive elites get their claws into him. I won't fall for the same ego-stroking Jukes did. In fact, I will ask for the exact same thing he did. If you can fund me to the tune of $2,000 a month, and I can make this my full-time job, considering the surveillance I was under in London has made me unable to do my career job, I'm kind of all eggs in one basket kind of right now. I will be making regular content from now on, at least one video a week. I'll be live reporting on protests, and once I'm more comfortable with my new setup, I'll hopefully live stream some documentaries and see if we can get into some live debates and interviews. Money donated will buy you no special privileges, and I will cap it at $2,000 per month if possible. I'm not much of a consumer. I don't ask for much. Thanks to everybody who's supported me so far. I honestly never wanted to turn this into a grift. I just wanted to talk to people. I just wanted a hobby. And that hobby is now turned practically into a life. So if you can help me help you understand the news better, and who are the gatekeepers of certain truths, then please donate. If not me, then who? If not now, then when?
I'm a neo-reactionary absolutist. I believe in a absolute world order, organized in a particular way.
When you're looking at a government is a corporation that owns a country. It just is. It's the same thing.
I'm Peter Thiel. I support people who are building new things. I'm not a politician, but neither is Donald Trump. And it's time to rebuild America.
Anything we can do to help this go along, and we're going to be there for you. And you'll call my people, you'll call me. It doesn't make any difference. We have no formal chain of command.